Should British doctors be given priority for the NHS jobs? 0207 862 2222 is the number that you need. Now, the government's 10-year plan for the NHS is due to be published this week with a promise to prioritise UK medical graduates for junior doctor posts. Now, it will commit to hiring no more than 1 in 10 doctors from abroad. So that is a commitment from overseas. Now, at the moment, 2/3 of doctors come from abroad. But the competition for specialist training places is high. It's about 5 applicants are expected for every job this year. So should Brits be prioritised, do you think, Ayo, for the NHS jobs?
I find this conversation a little concerning because I feel like it doesn't tell the story. Okay, why at the moment the NHS staff is 90% non-British workers, non-British national. And I think this is because there was a point in our history, and I say as we, because I'm British, is we weren't doing a sensible plan on workforce planning. We did not invest in the pipeline of future doctors because it cost £500,000 to take a junior doctor to be a consultant or a specialist. It's highly costly. We capped those spaces at university for medical students. We, year on year, government after government, made the decision not to invest in the future of our NHS. That was a decision. And as a short-term plan, in an emergency, we looked to our former colonies, Nigeria and countries like that, in India, and we said, please, we sent them the call. We need your help. We need you as qualified doctors to come here as registrars and to help us deliver our services, help our aging population, help us deal with complex medical conditions, because we had not invested long term. And they answered the call as former colonies and feeling part of the great, British Commonwealth. They came to help us.
But do you think that...
And now we're speaking like this.
But do you think... Look, no one is saying that response to a call for help wasn't appreciated. I think anybody who's had any treatment in the NHS recently will have observed the care that they get and how much the NHS is underpinned by a migrant workforce who have come here to keep the NHS up and running. But what the government is trying to do, what they're proposing, is saying we shouldn't be as dependent on foreign staff coming here to keep the NHS up and running. We should be able to be a little bit more self-sufficient. Do you have an issue with that?
I don't have an issue with that, but all I've read so far does not talk about addressing the core problem that led to this issue.
Sure.
It looks at looking at visas and immigration like they are the issue, like they are the problem, rather than those who came to help us and keep our NHS running.
Okay.
And right now, there are only 90% of NHS workers, staff that are non-British nationals. Let's look at it. 22,000 Nigerians, or is it 13,000 Portuguese people who are helping us?
Okay.
It feels like a spit in the face of them and their hard work and sacrifice.
Okay. Angela, did you agree with that?
I'm not sure I agree. It's a spit in the face, because it's a spit in the face for the taxpayers who've spent the $500,000 and more per medical student to be trained in this country. And I think
to become a specialist, we should say, consultant level.
Consultants,
Slightly less when you go to just junior.
So I think coming out of medical school, it's something like £250,000, £300,000. I know I've got sort of medics in the wider family, and I've seen it for myself, how that you get trained, you're obliged to work in the NHS, and when it comes to specialist training, there's this ridiculous bottleneck, and they've increased the number of medical student places, but the career opportunities have not stayed apace with that. Now, as the patient, as the client, we want to know that the person at the end of the bed is the very, very best person for the job, regardless of where they come from. And there is no doubt that doctors who have come from abroad have made the most enormous contribution to the robust nature of the NHS. We're not disputing that. And this is not about kind of, foreigners coming over, all that horrible right-wing rhetoric. There is a simple thing, which is if we want people who train in this country to remain invested in the NHS, given the cost that it is to the taxpayer, we want them to stay here. I think on a first-come, first basis, I think we should be giving British doctors first.
All right, but now let's get straight into your calls on whether British doctors should be given priority for jobs in the NHS. 0207 862 2222 is the number that you need to get your calls in. And Audrey's got in touch from Northampton. Audrey, welcome to the show. What do you think of this idea?
I'm 80 years old and I have a bit of a hearing loss. And my biggest problem is understanding foreign accents,
Right.
and also foreign doctors whose English isn't up to scratch.
I see. Yeah.
So simply not a matter of nationality on their passport,
Okay.
but their ability to communicate in clear English.
I think, Audrey, a lot of people will have been in the same circumstance as you and will understand that. And I mean, that issue of communication is important, particularly when you're in hospital, right?
Honestly, I think most professionals are able to do their job and speak in a way that other people understand.
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't be allowed to be a doctor in the NHS if you can't speak in a way that other people can understand.
Angela?
So sometimes it just has that, it's not the intent to feel like xenophobic or like racist, but sometimes that starts to creep
Yeah, I
into
don't
the
think it's
conversation.
xenophobic to sort of say I have difficulty understanding some accents sometimes. I think that's okay.
But if
right?
someone speaks perfectly good English and they're articulate and they're clear, but they have an accent,
Yeah.
How is that okay? Because it's no different from me saying, "Oh, you're Northerner, I can't hear you."
Get it all the time, love.
Because that's not acceptable. Remember, the BBC started making sure we had regional accents and not just
Angela,
RP because it was not representative. So if that's not allowed in that context, because it's not acceptable and it's not inclusive, then why is this okay as well?
Angela, how do you feel about that?
I think there's a bit of a mishmash going on here, respectfully, because I keep saying respectfully.
I quite like it.
Understand that it's done with respect. I'll try and stop saying that. No, but clearly, I think there's two separate strands here. I think from a practical level, when you are in hospital, super vulnerable. I had an eye procedure 6 weeks ago. I had an emergency eye surgery. You are so vulnerable. You're at the behest of these highly trained clinicians and nurses, let's remember, who do a lot of the firefighting. You just want to make sure that you understand and they understand. So I appreciate, especially if somebody's got a hearing issue, that's something to be considered. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have doctors from abroad, but maybe there should be some extra training there. But in terms of the specific debate here, if we are going to be self-sufficient, if we're not going to always have to put out the cries for help that you mentioned so articulately at the beginning, then we need to be able to say, we're training you in this country, we're putting you through medical school, we've increased the number of places at medical school, and we will enable you to be a specialist in this country, and we won't get a brain drain as a consequence of you not being able to get a fair crack of the whip here.
Audrey, thank you for getting in touch. I think that's a point that quite a few people will be having the same issues with. However, aren't the bigger problems when it comes to doctors the fact that we learned from the BMA that a third of doctors are applying to work abroad? Right? In 2023, 4,000 doctors at some point went abroad to practice. 79% of them went, they said, one of the reasons they left is for better pay. 75% said they felt undervalued, professionally undervalued. Isn't the problem that we're not paying doctors enough? And I know that they've had a pay rise, and a lot of people are very upset about that because other public sectors didn't get a pay rise, and they might be asking for even more money. But the issue is that there are better paid places to work. Australia seems to have figured out that, hang on, instead of paying anywhere between £250,000 to £500,000 to train doctors, what we can do is let the British taxpayer train them, and then we can ask them to come and work over here because we pay them slightly better.
But I thought also Australia also has a policy where they give their nationals priority over people coming abroad, and New Zealand does it as well. Remember, the UK dental programme in this country also gives priority to British nationals.
And before Australians get very upset with me, that's not the government policy. And of course, doctors are being trained in Australia, very good doctors, and are working in the Australian health system. But the issue is that a lot of doctors in this country feel undervalued and underpaid, and that's why they're leaving the NHS.
So there won't be a problem then.
But which is why we have about 1,500 shortfall in doctors alone, let alone nursing staff for the NHS, all the shortages we've got. Keith is in Hampshire. Keith, welcome to the show. What do you think about this idea to give priority to UK-trained doctors to the NHS? Oh, Keith, you might have to switch off your TV.
OK, thank you.
Yeah, switch it off and then you can hear us without the delay. Go on, Keith, what would you like to say?
Yes, I would like to say that I do think British students should actually get priority.
Yeah.
But I've got a bigger issue here. My issue is that the NHS is broken, and I'll tell you why. When you think of doctors, we invest all this money in training them, okay, but they don't go on decent contracts. Every business, if you invest in people, you make sure we get our money's worth. And I think every single dentist and doctor should be on 10, 12-year contracts.
Yeah.
No way of getting out of it, unless it's obviously for a very good reason. But we should apply the same principle to our nurses, everybody in the NHS professionals. They should all be on contracts. 6 to 8 years for nurses, for example, that would save millions or billions of pounds to the NHS.
Okay, let me pause you there, Keith, because Ayo is not having it.
Sorry, Keith, it's kind of funny, not to be disrespectful, but imagine if where you worked, you couldn't leave for 6 to 8 years, even if the terms changed, the government changed, the working contract changed, the pay did not keep up with the cost of living. That sounds a little bit like slavery, indentured servitude. You wouldn't agree with it, would you? So why should doctors and nurses not be able to move to a better career or a better path, or even leave the industry if it isn't right? I think we want to definitely get an ROI on investment, but that's starting to sound like not something trade unions would ever sign off on, and not right for people to have a good, safe career that they're opting into. You still have to have the autonomy, right?
Yeah, but it's public money that's training them. It's not just any old job. It's
Well,
out.
hang on. It is public money that medical students then have to pay back in the form of a huge
believe me,
debt.
I'm very aware of it.
Believe me, I'm going to become very aware of it too.
Okay, so we
as
know.
My daughter's going into medicine.
So yeah, so I'm very aware of the maths.
But Keith makes the point there, and there have been suggestions that, for example, you could have doctors who serve in the NHS would see a reduction of their student loan, and if you'd served in the NHS for 10 years, they would scrap your student loan so that you wouldn't have to pay. So there's an incentive in actually staying in the NHS because you're reducing the amount of your loan.
I think there's a lot of value in that. I think that the issue here is that on the one hand, well, if it's so rubbish here, why do we even need to make a statement about prioritising British doctors for British jobs? Because aren't they all disappearing? There's clearly a need, there's clearly a desire rather for people that are trained in this country to want to stay here, despite the circumstances. And I agree with you that we're not putting enough value in our doctors. I think the pay rise was too high, but I do think they need to be better valued for what they are.
We need to value them more and pay them less, is what you're saying.
We need to find a sweet spot, my dear. We need to find a sweet spot.
Listen, there's another message we've got from another Keith who says, if you want more British doctors, improve education and reduce university fees. Otherwise, take the best qualified, regardless of who they are. If they want to work here and can do the job, let them. Thank you for that on our Facebook page.